everyone, my name's Lottie and I work in the marketing department for DPAS. Recently I sat down with information sharing expert Bilal Ghafoor to discuss some work we did for a local council, and this is how it went. Today I'm with one of our consultants, Bilal, who's going to talk to us a little bit about some work that we've done recently. Bilal, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Bilal Ghafoor. I've been doing data protection for about 12 years, mostly in the public sector and the charity sector, and I've been a trainer for DPAS for a couple of years.
Brilliant. What was the problem that the council in question were facing?
So the problem the council was facing was actually a very, very common one, which is on a day-to-day basis, they were having to do a huge amount of data sharing internally and externally. And it's really, really fantastic that although the Caldecott principles don't apply directly to all of the council, that the idea of data sharing has been championed and the voice has been raised saying, yes, this is an essential part of public sector practice, and that this is incredibly beneficial to people if done with the right safeguards. So the problem the council was having was simply that they were doing a lot of data sharing, having to do a lot of it, and slowly over a period of time, their kind of technical understanding of the safeguards that they should have in place was being eroded, bad practice was creeping in, and so what they really needed was to kind of go through a refresher, and to kind of update their knowledge so they were on a firm basis and they could actually stand up and go, yes, we're going to share this data, or no, we're not going to share this other data.
Of course, yeah. So what issues were the staff specifically having?
So one of the most startling things for me was that this very, very interesting sentence kept on creeping up, which was sharing safeguarding information would be a breach of the Data Protection Act. And I kept on hammering home the point that sharing safeguarding data, or sharing data for the purposes of safeguarding, was not a breach of the Data Protection Act so long as you did it correctly. Very little ends up really being a breach of the Data Protection Act so long as you have due regard to what the Act tells you to do, so long as all the safeguards are in place, so long as you are transparent, so long as you know the lawful basis, etc. So that was a huge issue that they were having. The basic problem was that they were just never quite sure when they could and when they couldn't. What they really needed, and the ICO has put out fantastic guidance on data sharing, which is all excellent and really, really good. It's very, very long and detailed, as it should be, but it's kind of aimed at specialist teams. What we did was we kind of shriveled the whole thing down to about 8 stages, 8 things you needed to know, 8 kinds of decisions you needed to make. And once you'd made them, actually they were able to turn them into a really nice flow diagram, which they then sent me a copy of, and that was their decision tree. And so they then knew when it was appropriate, when to go out for more expert advice. They essentially were able to be on sure foot.
Oh, fab. Yeah, I think we've seen a few times where uncertainty kind of leads to negligence over time. Who did you deliver the training to?
So I asked that the council split their teams up, because each team shares different kinds of data and has different concerns. So of course, social workers and people working safeguarding, that was their big emphasis. That was the stuff they were sharing with multidisciplinary teams. They needed to know stuff about that. People working in revs and bends needed to know about their revs and bend stuff, and they heard all sorts of oddities about their data sharing with DWP, etc. So those were questions particularly relevant to them. So I took major teams within the council. We split them up. To be honest, half of the training was relatively generic. It was all about those kind of 8 stages, and the other half was drilling down into what each specific team needed to know and tailored examples about the kind of things that they're worried about sharing all day, every day.
Fab. So we've talked a little bit about, but what was included in that course?
So the 8 kind of stages would be the generic decision tree that they would have to go through about their sharing. And I kind of started off by, in fact, giving them a bit of a refresher on what is personal data, because again, Data Protection Act, I mean, we share data all day long. a lot of it just isn't personal data. So it was really drilling down into that, giving people kind of really horrible examples of things that might or might not be personal data. So one of the examples I gave was Bilal Ghafoor is on LinkedIn, which shows which school he went to. Is this personal data or not? Most people go, hang on a sec, Bilal Ghafoor, that's the name of the person running this training. Yes, clearly that is personal data. And then I had to tell them the tragic story about how my parents lied to me and how, in fact, I wasn't as special as I thought. And that, in fact, there were at least another 10 Bilal Ghafoors on LinkedIn. And so and many of them told you which school people went to, and therefore this was not personal data. That context is everything. So refresher on what is personal data, talking about just kind of anecdotal stuff about sharing, sharing gossip. What do we think about when we share gossip with people? What are the safeguards? Who do we confide in? Why do we confide in them? What are the advantages, disadvantages? And then those lessons imported into these 8 principles. And then, as I said, bespoke stuff around each specific team with worked examples about the kind of things that they're worried about sharing.
Brilliant. Just the last question, feel free to blow your own trumpet here. What was the feedback that was received?
Well, mercifully, it took place remotely. So no one managed to throw anything at me, which is something I would normally expect whenever I was delivering hours and hours and hours of data protection training. But no, I think what was really, really wonderful is that people were engaged. Quite a lot of the sessions overran. Because in fact people just had so many questions, and that for me that was kind of the best feedback of it all, is that everyone kind of sat upright and were engaged and constantly asked questions, but what about this, but what about this, and that for me was the best feedback. They were interested, they were engaged, they felt able to ask questions and get things that they were specifically worried about answered. And I mean, people were polite enough to say thank you, of course, at the end, but it was the engagement that I really, really loved, and that for me is the greatest feedback.
Of course, brilliant. Oh, well, thanks for your time, Bilal.